Jenny. Really a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me well? A little sound check. Excellent. So a lot of folks may know my name also from articles I've been writing in the Schwangum Journal. I've been putting a lot of content out there in the social world about solar panels ending up on prime agricultural farmland and concerns about that. I also am the co-founder of the Rondout Creek Watershed Alliance, a little bit of a revised edit on the bio there is primarily Ellenville for the last decade, with simply a weekend program in Brooklyn that I've been running seasonally there. But during the pandemic, we've taken our programming pretty much fully online with just hosting some permaculture meetups. We host a Brooklyn permaculture meetup. If folks don't know the meetup, it's a platform for people of like interests who can organize around any theme, like sustainable design or eco fabrics or entrepreneurship. And we have three that we host: the Brooklyn Permaculture Meetup, the Kingston Permaculture Meetup, and the New Paltz Permaculture Meetup. And so really, I've been an educator for most of my life. First, I came to this, what I'll share with you tonight, through the pathway of being a teacher and really teaching primarily high school age students for 10 years at a place called Apatinas in Chester County, Pennsylvania, K through 12 school, created curriculum there. Got the bug of ecological literacy. All these things have a lot of syllables and are tough to pronounce, but I'm fond of them. And ecological literacy is just like we're keen on the idea of literacy. David Orr, professor at Oberlin, coins this term, I would say, ecological literacy. And it's the broad term for what I'll be sharing with you tonight, which is the ability to look at the landscape and understand it as a series of processes that happen in a temporal framework. And those processes are things that are always going on, and we can either choose to pay attention to them or not pay attention to them. Whether or not we're paying attention to them, they continue to go churning along with or without us. And that's the nature of life on Earth. And so we'll start with some earth science, because over the years of teaching this, I then decided I needed to go build a site that was based on the things that I'll be sharing with you as a design process, which is referred to as permaculture design. And permaculture design, we'll geek out a little bit tonight on trees and on nut trees. And I used to say, when I was teaching a lot in New York City, where I taught for 10 years after homesteading off the grid for 8 years, freelance, not associated with any institution, just attracting students through my own curriculum. And what primarily my goal as an educator after teaching high school for 10 years, and then after living off the grid for 8 years, and then moving to New York City 14 years ago, my goal was to apply permaculture design, and still is, to the city of New York and to the Hudson Valley region as a case study in how we achieve a higher degree of food independence, energy independence, overall what these days is referred to as resilience. This has been the goal of permaculture since the 1920s, when the term was coined. And it focused then, and still a very important hinge-pin of it, is working with trees in particular deciduous forest ecologies, where they have this inexorable tendency to grow. No matter what we do, trees keep growing. We have a tendency as a species to cut them down, often more rapidly than they have an inclination to grow. And that becomes a problem, which we see feedback loops of today, in the form of, the primary real trigger mechanism for climate instability, climate chaos, that roller coaster ride that has now been set loose by ecological destruction. Anywhere you point your finger, that's been the legacy of the Western industrial colonial 500 years of ecological destruction and exploitation. And what permaculture design is about is addressing that. Reconciliation for the damage that's been done, restoring damaged ecosystems, and then also what's our vision of the future for how people have a better life here, now, and in the future. What's our short-term plan? What's our midterm plan? What's our long-term plan? These bite-sized pieces turn out to help us make a lot of sense of different strategies and how to consider them right now that we have placed before us. We've got certain solutions that fit the framework of short-term plan and short-term solutions. And those primarily we could put in the category of business as usual with greening it up a little bit. Big centralized solar, big mega hydro, big centralized wind, electric cars. These are short to midterm. Long term, a transportation infrastructure that puts an emphasis on a diversity of renewables that are geographically appropriate, and decentralized microgrids, and better mass transit and less reliance on individual motorized vehicles. So electric cars are transition technology. They're not a solution to the fact that highways are still a huge killer of wildlife and fragmenter of ecosystems due to the irrational amount of roadways in the United States, due to the gutting of the railway system and the gutting of light rail, right? So those are different ways that permaculture helps us to begin to unpack many of the things that often we don't have the systems thinking to begin to be able to, as individual citizens, really typically navigate the complexity overload situation that we're being handed by modernity, right? The situation we're in is not easy to unpack. So what I find as an educator, my focus has been how to frame the thinking that I think is helpful for you to dive into the nuts and bolts of these very compelling, potentially we could say crisis situations, as to what shows the weakness and the fragility of the industrial, centralized, import, export, globalized economy. You know, take your pick. Is it a pandemic? Pandemics have been taking down civilization primarily, really. You know, we definitely know about them since the 1400s, when, say, 50 to 60% of Europeans died from the Black Death. And it's clear when we look at history that the main thing that triggered population growth has been vaccines, not food supply. And so it's also clear from studies out of Rome, studies out of the UN, that right now we're looking at a population crash, especially throughout the G20 nations. Why is that? People are having less children, fertility rates have dropped a lot, and we're going to be looking at an aging population that doesn't have enough younger people to actually be doing a lot of the work inside of countries like Italy, Belgium, the UK. Very real thing is now we're never going to even hit 10.5. We're looking like 8.7, maybe. Totally different science. Check it out. Population crash. Just do a search on it. Very interesting stuff. So what is it that actually has taken us down for the longest time throughout human history? Humans packed in small amounts of spaces, causing a disease vector that causes massive die-off of large percentages of our population. And so the question becomes, really, how do we create resilience in a way that doesn't get held hostage to problems that have been historical problems throughout time? And the thing to look at is food supply and how to shorten the distance of the transmission of goods and services, because the supply line's fragility is what the pandemic highlighted, but it's also what many historians were talking about when we were concerned about peak oil and running out of fossil fuels. And this is a very apt number, which is that within 3 days, when the trucks stop running, the grocery store shelves are empty. Right? That's a truism, right? And then imagine the level of desperation and comfort with authoritarianism that follows on the heels of the food supply disappearing, right? Very quick inroads to police state scenarios. So these are just some brainstorm things to introduce you to how permaculture navigates the fact that, this idea of, like, let's say, planning for climate chaos, planning for disaster preparedness, that is what permaculture comes from as a modality for more than 40 years, because it started in Australia. And Australia is a very extreme, unpredictable, dramatic climate. And so a lot of the things that today we're challenged with because of the out of control impacts of industrialization are things that actually have been at the core of what permaculture as a design system has been asking since its inception. Bill Mollison, who coins the term with David Holmgren, he's basically contracting a concept that's called permanent agriculture. And he combines that into permaculture. So what we're going to look at is, how do we apply permaculture to the Rondout watershed and the Hudson Valley watershed to create a plan for food security here that really has some good science and some good thinking behind it. So let me dive into that with some images for you to give you a sense of this. Right, it's important to start with the context of adaptive design, of design that is paying attention to how dynamic the planet is and what types of systems we want to bring into play as we retrofit the present system is a system that makes more design sense for where we are geographically and climatologically. So understanding that we're circling the sun at 67,000 miles per hour in our orbit, and that freshwater is a very rare and precious resource. Literally 1% of all the water on the entire surface is actually potable, drinkable fresh water. 3% of that water is in total, but 2% of that 3% is locked up in polar ice caps for now. And the other 1% of it is inaccessibly deep in groundwater reserves that we still don't have drills that can drill that deep. So 1%, all the water on the planet is fresh water. The Earth is 24,901 miles in circumference. It's 70% ocean, 30% land. Life evolves in the ocean, stays there for 4 billion years. This is an important theme. Stays there for 4 billion years, right? Why does life stay in the ocean for 4 billion years? We'll come back to that. The Hudson Valley watershed. It's about 14,000 square miles, loosely 8,960,000 acres of land. The New York City water supply system, the map on the right, plays a major role in this landscape as far as land management practices. Lots of protection around the upland drainage basin that feeds the reservoirs. Downstream from the reservoirs, very little protection, exorbitantly high fecal and E. coli rates, all kinds of warnings on the Rondout at high falls. All of these come from things like chronic noncompliance by major sewage treatment plants throughout the main stem of the Rondout, right? Watersheds don't follow county lines, don't follow municipal lines, yet they are the lines that all of our water follows. So design-wise, we've got an adaptive challenge where we need to create things that have even more syllables, like intermunicipal watershed agreement plans. It was so many syllables that people got tired saying it, and so the meetings just stopped happening because people just fell asleep even thinking about it. So Ulster County, the Rondout watershed is the case study that I like to zoom in on. It's a sub-watershed of the Hudson, and then sub-watersheds are made up of further sub-watersheds. They're fractal. And that fractal geometry of watersheds also has a certain beauty to it, in that adaptively, it means we've got a microtopography that we can begin to say, what types of food crops make sense for the Verneuil watershed is different than what types of food crops make sense for the Mamankating, which is different than the Sandberg. But of course, paying attention to difference isn't really what industrial agriculture is about. In fact, that's about utterly destroying and homogenizing and uniformity. And the United Nations doesn't agree with this. The quotes on this screen are from the United Nations. They put out a study saying that the required transformation in Western farming is much more profound than simply tweaking the existing industrial agricultural system. What the United Nations is calling for to achieve international food security is what they call an ecological intensification, which means farming in a way that is more like how nature works, which is so different than anything from what we see at present largely practiced, that it's not very well understood in the United States, right? Typically 90% of our food, we'll find study after study is going to corroborate this number. If you ask how much of the food that we eat in the Hudson River Valley is grown in the Hudson River Valley, maybe 10%. 90% of what most people are eating comes from outside of where they live. What is outside? Could be 3,000 miles away, could be 10,000 miles away, could be on the other side of the planet, but 90% of it does not come from where we live. And that makes us food insecure. That makes us vulnerable in terms of the foundation of life, which is food, right? In addition, industrial agriculture is contaminating groundwater with systemic contaminants that have all kinds of negative impacts on our immune system, like this one we're seeing on an EPA map showing the central United States and the eastern United States and pockets throughout the West contaminated with atrazine, a chemical used in industrial farming. And furthermore, we have a real problem with toxic contamination legacies that we need to be avoiding the continued creation of. And that's another incentive to design a different infrastructure. And furthermore, every single nuclear power plant in the United States already has a wretched excess of nuclear waste on site, according to all the regulatory agencies. And so since they have an unsafe and unstable quantity of nuclear waste on site, they all need to be decommissioned and shut down. And now we need to all put our hands together and have a prayer circle to hopefully suddenly manifest a safe place to dispose of radioactive waste, even though there's no engineer or geologist that's ever been willing to testify to the federal government that there is such a thing. That's why we can't find a permanent waste repository, because there's no safe way to permanently dispose of radioactive waste. All they are is outdated behemoths that are leftover relics from the nuclear weapons complex to create plutonium. 37% of our rivers and streams unfishable and unswimmable. 50% of our lakes and ponds unfishable and unswimmable. This is according to the EPA. This is why we need to adapt agriculture to topography and to water. Like here, where we're going across the slope, we're doing crop rotation. Trees are still the best solar collectors on Earth, especially when we have grazing animals underneath edible landscapes of nut trees, of fruit trees that provide firewood, create a diverse, productive farm. Coppicing woodlots, where we actually plant intentional woodlots just to rotationally harvest them for hundreds and hundreds of years and continuously use them for firewood like we have throughout Northern Europe. This is what coppicing woodlots look like. This is what it looks like to use wood wisely and intelligently, a renewable natural resource that we can cook our dinner with and heat our hot water with and heat our homes with. Masonry stoves, only the most efficient, highly engineered wood heating system in the world that came out of Denmark in the 1600s, but is largely untapped and undeveloped because we're all myopically buying the industrial solution set, which is electric, electric, and more electric for things that make no sense to do with electric, like heat. Or passive solar home design, not passive house design, but passive solar house design, which means you orient the house to the south and you use glass to protect the house in the wintertime and increase the passive performance of the house with things other than geothermal heat pumps, splits, and industrial insulation. And designing houses that actually are purposefully laid out to be protected by where they're placed in the landscape, with protective wind belts to the north side, with greenhouses on the south side, and ponds and coppicing woodlots in hazelnut and filbert hedgerows. Converting existing farm fields, where we can take a farm field, do a design and plan for incorporating long upper story nut tree plantings, use tractors to implement organic vegetable production. And these numbers, according to Glenwood Institute, there's over 600 million in unmet demand for local organic produce in the Hudson Valley. Demand outstrips supply in so many sectors that, again, you can shake a stick at. It's astonishing, but it really isn't astonishing, because what are we expecting? The entrepreneurial small business enterprise person to go after a market that really requires that you take a lot of risks? Typically, entrepreneurial businesses are already risky. So people stick with things that is a tried and true market, conventional home construction, conventional landscaping with ornamentals. It's much more straightforward than trying to find people who want you to drive around their tractors to establish an organic vegetable farm for them. It turns out that the University of New Hampshire did a study called A Food Vision for Lower New England, in which they estimated that we could feed all the people of New England, 14.5 million people, on 16 million acres, and that they could do that within 6 states in New England, while still staying within 70% wildland and wetland. Yet only 12% of the food is grown there. And we'll take that study and we'll use that study to do a quick schematic here on what it looks like to do that in the Rondout watershed. Turns out, according to a Cornell study, that fruit and fresh market farms make considerably more per acre than conventional field crop farms. So if you do a diversity of things, this is from these beds. So we started with this, established these beds, planted it all out. This is a kimchi crop with lupins in the foreground. This is blueberries, strawberries, and cut flowers, right? So diversity of things. Irrigating with rainwater, also largely untapped, but a huge resource that we need to have more diversification of water systems, not simply well-centric and throwing pumps in surface waterways, but developing some solutions that solve often foundation problems, solve basement water issues, and create now a resource that's in a sizable, most of the tanks that we're installing are more like this size, because, when you really want to make an alternative water system, it's not about what I call a token feel-good 55-gallon drum, but when you start getting into 1,500 gallons and 2,700 gallons, now you can irrigate your farm. And then when you lay out your beds all on contour, those on contour beds decrease runoff, increase rainwater infiltration, and decrease the need for irrigation. So now, simply by what we're looking at here are beds that were done, raised beds for vegetable production that are done on contour and are using local materials, local hand tools. New York State is ranked number 3 in the nation for the total number of acres dedicated to organic growing and certified organic farms. Small organic farms give more to food banks than large monocrop farms. So these are important context setters for where I'm suggesting we can go with an initiative at a community scale in the Rondout watershed, in the Wallkill watershed, in the Esopus watershed, to begin to master plan for food independence for our entire population. I've been going to study at places like Four Winds for more than 10 years, taking students there, going there to just hang out with Jay and Polly, who run this farm. This farm is just one of the most dialed in, well done operations in the region. No doubt about it. NOFA certified, Northeast Organic Farming Association certified organic. Above and beyond USDA organic is NOFA certified organic. They are a no-till tractor farm that does community scale food production, that has a passive solar straw bale root cellar that you're looking at in the background of this image. So in the background of the image, we've got the root cellar with photovoltaic panels on it. That is a bank barn. The bank barn part that's underground is slip form concrete. As the building comes to grade, as you move out from the bank, the whole building is straw bale. And it paid for itself within 2 years of being built, according to Jay, just by the amount of refrigeration he gets done with no electricity because of the passive design. Using fossil fuel technology to increase biodiversity. So here what we're looking at is a small excavator being used to create a pocket pond in a topography where there was no watering hole for wetland, there was no habitat for amphibians, and there was certainly no opportunity to, say, irrigate some nut trees or some berries or a vegetable patch. Bringing these solutions to people who live in high density urban areas, and how do we then train people in the skills to create these ecologies, to work more with perennial crops, to understand gardening techniques that we can take to the city, take to the suburbs, and safely grow organic food, potentially on sites that are contaminated. And this is why we focus on, often for organic vegetable production, these raised bed systems here that you're looking at. This is Adriana, and this is one of our classes at Center for Bioregional Living in Ellenville. And this is one of our classes in Prospect Park in Manhattan. And this is one of our design courses at the Brooklyn Commons in Brooklyn, New York. And this is what we teach people how to do, which is design. And we teach a wide spectrum of people. And we follow in Bill Mollison's directive here, where he says there is one and only one solution, and we have almost no time to try it. We must turn all our resources to repairing the natural world and train all our young people to help, and any age people to help. They want to, we need to give them this last chance to create forests, soils, clean waters, clean energy, secure communities, stable regions, and to know how to do it from hands-on experience. And that has been my focus as an educator, as a designer, as a community member in Ellenville, in Wawarsing, in the Rondout watershed, is to train people in how to do these things through my classes, through having the good fortune to present to you tonight. These are folks who were planting nut trees, were planting different, here we're working with solar thermal hot water systems. Here we're retrofitting a 57-acre dairy farm. And I want to show you this example of how the design process works, where we're taking a farm that was what we would call a single function farm, simply trying to max out how much milk you could have generated by a herd of dairy cattle. And when you take that kind of farm with permaculture, you adapt productive potential based on the client's goals. This client wanted to still have animals, but wanted to have people staying on the site, wanted to also grow vegetables, raise chickens, have some fruit and nut crops. And so what we did was we incorporated all those things into what the site suggested for where to locate them. And so where there's steep slope, a lot more tree crops that are on contour. This is something you'll see in the drawing that's called silvopasture. Silvopasture is all over in Europe, very little represented in the United States. And it's the simple act of planting trees at a distance so that you still get dappled light and you can graze animals under it. But those trees are specifically planted to either be periodically harvested for building materials, or to drop a beneficial forage for the livestock, or to provide nuts, or potentially all three. It turns out that in cool weather climates, grasses decline in productivity in the middle of the summer because they tank in productivity because they're too hot. It turns out in a silvopasture pasture, you don't get that drop off in production of grasses in the middle of the summer because they are somewhat protected by light shade. So that's just one example of a method that we take to these properties and say, let's increase the riparian buffer. Because I do a lot of restoration ecology, I'm also thinking about, where do we increase biodiversity? Where do we get animals away from wetlands and stream corridors and reforest them and revegetate them, but with things that wouldn't necessarily just show up naturally, that we introduce that fit with what would naturally show up. Hybrid hickory trees, selected varieties of acorns that get bigger nuts. This is part of how we can then begin to create a mashup that makes no sense to people who are strict conservationists and makes no sense to people who think all you can do is farm without doing it in a way that fits with ecology. And these are often very divorced camps. You know, people who work in conservation, restoration, ecology, they often aren't that versed or literate or considering that perhaps there's a sustainable and ecological way that we could integrate farming, farm harvests, in ecologically restored landscapes. And that's what I'm suggesting here. Very real thing that people have demonstrated all over the world, but largely still siloed in the United States. So we need to bring those worlds together. This is part of the work of the Permaculture Living Lands Trust that we've created, is to show that we can have productive landscapes, sustainable harvests in places that need to be reforested. This is part of how I'm showing, you know, Cornell is backing this up. This is from a Cornell document on silvopasture. And they're saying that this method that I'm introducing conceivably to some of you tonight is both productive per acre, very lucrative to get into, and a very important part of the solution set for food supply and future challenges that we're looking at to address the need for better resilience, better design of our food system. Nut trees, these are different plantings that are just not protected, that we're doing the research to find out who owns them, how do we protect these selected and horticulturally grown older nut tree plantings so that we can reforest parts of the region with these genetics. So the transition is from an industrial economy moving off of fossil fuels to something that's more ethical, more regional for energy and food. So coming back to our watershed, as we look at the Hudson River watershed, this is from Scenic Hudson. The stat is not. The stat is from a study about U.S. food supply. 1/3 of all food in the U.S. is wasted, right? And what this means is that the reason people are going hungry is not because we don't grow enough food. The reason people are going hungry is because of waste and unequal distribution of an excess of production. There is a wretched excess of production. This is how 1/3 of it gets wasted, and we still have people going hungry, right? Furthermore, this map is showing you how Scenic Hudson thinks the only land that we should worry about protecting in the Rondout watershed, if you understand what you're looking at, when you look at those dots in the map that outlines Ulster County, if you look at that with me for a second, look at those brown dots and the green dots. What would you say geographically, what are we looking at? What are those dots following the pathway of? What do you think that shape is? Any guesses? Remember what the case study is that I'm doing for you all. Somebody give a shout out. What are we looking at?
River Valley?
Yeah, it's a river valley. That is the Rondout, right? So what we're looking at is the S, it goes all the way up to Kingston, and it starts about Sandberg Creek is about the bottom of where those brown dots are. My point here, quick, I'll try to be, I'm obviously covering a lot, so I'm compressing a lot here. My point here is to say that for a traditional conservation group, in this case, Scenic Hudson, doing really important work, so thankful they're in the area, their only focus of land to protect in our entire county is that land where those brown dots are and the green dots are. And this is because by their estimation, those are the only soils that we would on a map find to be prime agricultural soils, prime ag soils. Quick side note of absurdity, as many of you know, we are putting solar panels on prime ag soils, even though we have conservation groups saying this is some of the most sacred, important soil for growing food, and it's not a place to graze sheep and rationalize under some term like agrovoltaics. We can graze sheep. You see that tan area in Ulster County? That's great for sheep grazing because you know what that's defined as? Not prime agricultural soil. So less than prime agricultural soils, that's where dairy operations happen. That's why Ulster County was also known as dairy land, right? Because it doesn't have a lot of prime ag soil. But you go on the other side of the river, look at how much they want to protect in Columbia and Dutchess. That's because it has much more high percentages of prime agricultural soils. So then let's zoom into Ellenville, where I live, right? In Ellenville, poverty rates in the region have been getting worse. 33% of children in Ellenville live in poverty. 14% is the national average. There's 2 food deserts in Ulster County. Kingston with 17.4% living below poverty line and in not able to walk to get to fresh produce. Then the other is Ellenville at 16.4%. So what do we need to do? Here's what I've been saying since Pat Ryan was our county executive, but nobody seems to want to hear what I'm telling them. We need a community and arts center in Ellenville. We need a food co-op and a fresh food place for people to be able to walk to. We need a commercial scale municipal compost facility. We need a green job vocational training center. Then we'd have something that could actually be called a revitalization plan for Ellenville. Rondout lower non-tidal subbasins. This is the kind of dry language that the DEC uses and why people don't show up to a lot of environmental talks, because it doesn't make any sense to them. But you all know, because this is an in-crowd, what we're talking about here, right? The lower non-tidal. So why the lower part? Because as I touched on briefly, the whole above drainage basin has tons of money from New York City being thrown at protecting it. It's in fine shape. The part of the Rondout that needs us to think about it and rally around it is the lower part, the part below the reservoir, all the way out to where it hits Kingston, right? So there's 91,500 people in this land base that we're talking about that goes from Warsing and Wurtsboro all the way up to Kingston, 91,500 people. It's about 719,000 acres of land under the Food Vision for Lower New England, that study that came to the number that we can grow enough food for 14.5 million people on 16 million acres. That we're going to quickly look at. They came to a number which is 1.6 acres per person for, and this is the part that I get excited about, full diet year-round food supply, right? That's what we're talking about here. That's what we deserve. And that is within our reach in this region very easily. To achieve that, we only need to use 118,000 acres of the land that's in this region to grow food for the people who live in this region, and then have distribution hubs and have processing hubs. Here we're looking at the Rondout watershed, right? So now we get schematic about it and we start to say, okay, where should all the potatoes be grown? Where should all the onions be grown? Where should all the garlic? Where should all the winter squash? Where should we have pastured dairy? Where should we have pastured beef? Right, to begin to do this analysis is critical to creating a truly resilient food system for every single geographic population in the United States. And to begin to say, what does it look like on a property by property basis? Here's one that we did a quick mock-up of. This turned into a barbecue joint. It's on 209. It was called Bert's Farm Stand. And we at one point decided, let's just think about what we would do if we were to work with that property, because it's a great example of a property where you can grow some annual vegetables, you could have some you-pick blueberry, you could do some events, it has a greenhouse, it has walk-in fridges. You know, if these types of sites are primarily about food production for the local population, we can start to support them with tax line items that go specifically to acquiring land that we want to put under conservation easement, and then paying farmers to be salaried growers for town production. And as we begin to imagine what this would look like, we conserve and avoid development in places that are in the shotgun line of sight of flood events. And then we plan for where does new development make sense to allow to happen that isn't going to just cause us throwing taxpayer dollars or insurance money at rebuilds that we could predict are going to be happening on 30 and 50 and 10-year rotations, right? There are places that are vulnerable and there are places that are not vulnerable. This was a schematic that came after Irene in Vermont, and it was put out by the Vermont Natural Resources Advisory Council as a response to how to adapt to what Irene had shown them. Again, this is that same thing, Glenwood, plenty of money that wants to be spent on local organic food. What that means is if we need to do this as a for-profit venture to start up the vitality of local production, we can go that route. That demand is there. This is further evidence of it. This is from the Hudson Valley Small Business Council. They're also saying the best sector of growth is what they call things like agribusiness tourism. And so we can dovetail these things that people are all saying we need to have more farming in the area, and it's what people want to pay money and spend money on when they come to the area. Okay, then help us figure out how to finance that rather than throwing solar panels on top of prime agricultural soils that then you have to run bobcats around to in order to keep them producing any electricity in the wintertime. Here's the food vision for Lower New England. Providing 2/3 of our food involves an increase from 6 million to 7 million farm acres and a dramatic reallocation of crops. Additional acres can be found without driving regional forest cover below the wildlands and woodlands goal of 70% land devoted to fruits and vegetables in and around cities doubles to 500,000 acres, mostly in southern New England. Then they go on to say urban green space with intensive production, an additional 750,000 acres for grass-fed milk and dairy, because they're designing for what's called omnivore's delight. So our 1.6 acre per person full diet year-round food supply that I'm suggesting as a starting place for your imagination on this for me is what is called the omnivore's delight diet, where there is meat and dairy. However, it is all from ethically, humanely raised animals that are 100% grass-fed and pastured. And we want to think about creating city to country connections, the importance of riparian corridors, protecting rivers and streams, the opportunity as we do so to plant nut trees, create walking trails, create bike trails, plant hybrid. These are actually grafted hickories that are a selected variety of hickory that is much like a pecan meets a walnut, very huge nut meat, very easy to crack. Imagine you're riding your bike, there's nuts falling off of the trees, you collect some, throw them in your backpack, and they're these huge walnuts that you can easily enjoy eating when you get home. Here's a tri-grafted heart nut and butter heart nut that is randomly next to a parking lot in Pennsylvania where it could get cut down by an arborist crew anytime. Happens to have been planted 70 years ago by a horticulturalist who we've been following and learning about other plantings that they did, and then ones that are less vulnerable but potentially protectable we're in the process of protecting. This is a hand-drawn rendering that we've got better drawings of, but it's basically starting to design the details of what does it look like for us to reforest in a riparian zone, in a upland drainage of a place where we want to protect water supply. Could we reforest areas to protect water supply, to prevent erosion, with things that both are native and increase biodiversity and are interplanted with appropriately genetically selected varieties of edible. Hickcan, for instance, that you see there on the right-hand side, that is a blending of hickory with pecan, right? Swiss stone pine is what is used in pesto. Hazelnuts, we're all familiar with, right? Juneberry, blueberries. And create more of what we'd call ecopolis, which is where we begin to have a beneficial financial, economic, and land management plan between high-density urban areas like New York City and outlying suburban and rural areas like the Hudson Valley. Here's an example of that I'm working on for a book that I'm finishing on what this type of new economy looks like. The book's title is Earth is Our Home, a New Model for Economic Development. And what I'm working on in that is, in this drawing, one of the examples of it is what does it look like to retrofit the whole northeastern corridor with permaculture design, where we take this concept in permaculture of the zones of use, which is very familiar to people who have encountered. Often it's one of the things that you'll have heard about when you first enter into the world of permaculture language, or these zones. It's easy to get a little confused because we often in gardening think about growing zones. And growing zones are different than what the permaculture zones of use are based on. Permaculture zones of use which is what we're looking at here, based on the idea that we garden and manage the landscape differently when it's a part of the landscape that we're going to interact with a lot. By a lot, what we mean is daily, right? And this is what in this drawing is called Zone 1. Zone 1 is places that have a lot of people here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a pattern of land development that recurs throughout the northeastern corridor, where we've got about, numbers I've come across, 90 million people. It's a little less than a third of the US population that lives between Washington, Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston. And there's a pattern. It's a pattern that repeats here, which is that high density urban areas make sense for things like leaf crops, for microgreens, for mushroom farming. But as soon as you start to think about what are you going to have, you're not going to have a micro dairy herd. You're probably not going to grow all your winter squash on a rooftop farm, or pumpkins. They tend to, watermelons, right? We can just think through a couple crops and start to think, yeah, it doesn't really make my mind's eye get excited, the idea of a giant squash or watermelon farm on a rooftop. But huge operations growing lettuce, growing kale, growing arugula, growing tatsoi, growing bok choy, growing, frisee, escarole, right? Say Zone 2, suburban areas. That's where we're going to grow more things that take up a lot of space, like onions, like garlic, like root crops, like what are often called micro livestock, chickens, guinea pigs, rabbits, right? Zone 3, now we're getting into the area. It's kind of transitional. It's more rural. That's where we can have nurseries, bigger farms with niche market dairy, silvopasture, events, nut trees. Zone 4 is when we're more full-on country, rural area. That's where we're going to have bigger operations with larger herds, in this case, this region, forestry. And Zone 5 is wilderness, places that are very light foraging contact, perhaps areas of no human contact. And here's a further map. I like maps. And this map is this is actually an interesting map for local reference. This is from when the Nature Conservancy was managing Sam's Point. And this was their document that they had to show how they were approaching expanding the conservation envelope around the Shawangunk ridgeline there, which is shown in orange. And part of what they were also showing with this was why it's ecologically valuable enough to spend money to protect it, right? Then this is part of why we've combined the powers of the conservation community with the understanding of the plant world and ecological design of permaculture with our Permaculture Living Lands Trust, because my right-hand colleague in that has been a professional director of land trusts and fundraiser of over $15 million in protected land, and his name is David Harper. And he and I, with our colleague Lisa DePiano, created the Permaculture Living Lands Trust to combine the strength of the conservation community, which is quite robust, with the strength and knowledge of the permaculture, nursery, tree crop, and animal husbandry community, which is often left out. We have a lot of organic farmers that know a lot about growing high-end veggies for farmers markets, but are we actually looking at a production sector that we can say gives us full diet year-round food supply? Or as many designers will say, are we talking about the icing on the cake, not the cake? Maybe we shouldn't be eating so much cake. So let's design for this rare and precious life-giving gift. Let's create cities we want to live in. Best way to cool down cities is green roofs. Photovoltaic panels on green roofs perform better. We can create habitats for songbirds, create wildlife corridors. We can grow food for people in cities, develop renewable energies. This one's very underdeveloped. Solar thermal hot water can be all your hot water for domestic compost heating greenhouses, undertapped renewable systems, right? There's a whole book on it by an engineer. We've taught classes on this. How do you heat your greenhouse with a compost pile, right? It turns out they get up to 150 degrees. We've got a lot of food scraps ending up in landfills. Another job opportunity, energy opportunity. We've got a lot of sewage and unmanaged effluent and nutrient loads that places like Burlington, places like Magic Hat Brewery are using this energy to create fuel, to create electricity. In Sweden, this methane that is collected from compost, 25% cheaper at the pump than gasoline. In China, it's powering 40 million homes. The EPA estimates 60% of what ends up in landfills could be diverted, 41 million tons a year. That is something we need to get a real bug about and get on top of that. In Ulster County, in each of our municipalities, we need to really have a smart, well thought out, diversified plan for what to do with organics and turn them into good resources. Here we're looking at a farmer, this guy, Carl Hammer, runs a multi-million-dollar business that's making his finished product, which is compost all out of food scraps, but he also happens to free range 1,200 chickens. They eat nothing but the food scraps that he makes the finished product of the compost, feeds them nothing, not a drop of grain. They lay 900 dozen eggs a month. He doubled the size of his flock when I was last there. I take students again to sit at this guy's feet. This is what we do. I train people on all this stuff, right? Calcutta, 26,000 people are employed just processing compost. It's a lot more fun than working at a recycling center. All right, I'm just going to whip through this, bring nature into the city. Here we're looking at photovoltaics, solar thermal hot water, green roofs. This is a really nice example of urban retrofit. All these technologies need to be combined. Greening up the city, daylighting rivers, that's what we're looking at here, right? Daylighting a river in the East Village.
I think so, yeah.
All right, folks. Honor, remember our ancestors, witness, enjoy the awe of the earth, and ask any questions you might have. I know that was a roller coaster ride, so I appreciate folks sticking with it.
I'm going to take the liberty of asking the first question.
Perfect, thank you.
When I drive around Ulster County, I see lots of fields that I'm clearly were once farm fields that are now taken up with private homes. Maybe at the worst, they're just being mowed with grass, maybe taken for hay. It seems to me there is still a lot of farmland in Ulster County, but it's disappeared into private, 3-acre, 10-acre, 200-acre homes. I think that's one problem, but I also think about who's going to work all this land. Are there enough people willing to do the type of organic farms that you've been highlighting to make a go of it, to fill the need for food, not merely in the county, but to a lot of our food does end up in New York City. So it's both a labor question and a loss of farmland. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I would say the labor question is not really, I mean, we have an unemployment challenge. What I would say is the thinking behind this that I've suggested is both market demand is there for business enterprises that want to do it on the free market, whatever that means. But then there's also very real opportunities to actually create a tax line item where we are paying people to run these farms on land that is actually owned by the town. Here's an example I'm talking about. Marbletown, Historic Preservation Fund, buying the Osterhout Flats property. We've been exploring the idea of that being a property that starts to become relevant to the food needs of the Marbletown citizens. And if you begin to take this concept and say, what would it look like for all the municipalities to take a percentage of all new development that happens and put it into a fund and then use that money to buy up land that's been identified as particularly important for achieving both ecological protection of the watershed and for the potential to be providing a percentage of the food needs of people who live within that municipality. And if you look at places like Chester County, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, you would see that they're actually pulling in upwards of $20 million a year that does nothing but goes towards an open space fund. And that's because citizens in Chester County, Pennsylvania realized that if they did not finance an open space fund with a percentage of their taxes, they weren't going to have open space left. And so there's very robust funding intelligence around this that's already been innovated in other parts of the country, that all we need to do is get the citizenry here to realize that that's the future of life in our region, is overdevelopment, with letting developers just push around our land use patterns and our planning boards because we don't have a proper comprehensive master plan to prevent that type of nonsense from happening. And the only way we as citizens prevent bad development from moving into our area is with a preventative, forward-thinking master plan that plans it out of what is allowed to happen in our area due to very well-funded, engineered ecological analysis that planning boards actually pay attention to and don't just leave on a shelf, which is often what happens with open space plans and open space inventories, right? So we need a planning board that actually then follows citizen activist community-led processes that begin to actually, like they've done in Marbletown with creating that historic preservation plan, they did a lot of analysis from meetings I've had. It seems like they're really right on track with something that we just basically need to replicate throughout all of the municipalities here, which is starting to get real about the fact that any new development needs to pony up something towards protecting open space. And then we can get the citizens to get excited about initiatives like this, that they keep expanding in these places where development pressure is pretty strong. So I do think it's important. It's a great question, because I think it's really important to address two things, which are land use patterns and the continued gobbling up of land that could be used for this kind of concept, for things that make it not usable for things like food production for our local population. And then correspondingly, how are we going to finance people actually doing all this work? And my thought about that is we need to get farming out of the commodity sector and out of market-driven dynamics and move more of it into something that's literally just supported by our tax base. Because the problem that we have right now, as I see it as a designer and an educator in the field of food systems, is that our food system at present, we imagine, is going to suddenly meet the real needs of the crises and challenges of climate instability simply by letting the market get us there somehow magically. The markets, we're just going to end up with something that's going to save us from a system that is so fraught with instabilities that the fragility of it is mind-boggling. The industrial, globalized import-export food system is an incredibly hyper-extended, antiquated, beyond unsustainable phenomenon that we all depend on for our very lives, right? And I just don't think that's a good plan. And we need
Well,
to.
I think you also have to educate consumers to understand that there's seasons for food. I mean, one reason we are buying stuff from Chile or Argentina is people want strawberries in the middle of the winter, or
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's more like a frivolity. That's like people wanting something that's sort of a frill. I mean, the reality is what I'm talking about is let's grow the flour. Let's grow the potatoes. Let's grow the onions. We don't need to get into the like really extravagant things that, of course, people may still want to buy oranges and may still want to buy strawberries. But how about if we at least start to get it so that their onions, their garlic, potatoes, right? Those things are coming from closer at hand. That's what and planting nut trees all along the Rondout. So as people are going on canoe trips, they've got giant butternuts and heart nuts falling in their canoes. This is just a right that I think future generations have a reason to expect to inherit. And it's our responsibility as present stewards of the earth to leave it in a way that truly provides abundance for future generations if we can see a path forward to creating that. And that's what I'm working on and sharing with you tonight is the best guess I can put together of how to get us there. What does it look like from my years of experience working in watershed group, working in restoration ecology, and working in education. And I'm really excited and honored to be able to be sharing these ideas with you all as real community members here who understand many of the references that I can make throughout my time of teaching and working in this region. Yeah, Penny.
I wonder how, I mean, I'm reading the same stuff you are about the melting ice caps and how little time we have. And I really appreciate the vision. I just wonder how given the dysfunctional state of our politics, how we get there. And I do appreciate the fact that you are creating in Ellenville a kind of template, something for people to look at that's both you can support it financially, and it's regenerative. But is it political or just word of mouth that gets us there? I hate asking that question.
I think we need both, and we need all of it, right? We need push-pull, we need grassroots, groundswell, and we need policy that can pull it, and directive. We need to work at all levels of it. Heather.
Hi there. I'm sorry, I'm late. I'm a little bit late to the meeting, so you may have covered part of this.
Oh,
but
no,
it seems
please.
it seems to me like part of the solution would be working with developers, especially on the zone that's closest to the homes. I mean, I think a big piece of that is actually getting people to grow their, I mean, a lot of, especially children, love growing their own food and love interacting with it. So if you can actually get developers to see, the merit of doing this and see how that might draw people in, and actually be able to start designing some of those zones that are directly, related to the, to the home development or to the city development. So I don't know, that was just a thought I had as you were speaking.
Well, sure. Yeah, totally concur. You'll probably hear me say this phrase a lot, and I mean it, which is both and. And what I mean by both and is that in this case, both we want to direct where those developers are allowed to go about creating their development. And then once we as the community have shaped the location to fit our analysis of what is a good location for development, then within that, having developers be advocates of a better land use pattern within the layout of their development could actually be another overlay that planning boards put on it that we could call, and already has a name, which is conservation development. And conservation development was innovated by a guy named Hannah Arendt, who is in Chester County, Pennsylvania. He wrote a book called Growing Greener, Planning Conservation into Local Plans and Ordinances. Right. This is what I mean by this stuff is not new, already been done. All we need to do here in the Hudson Valley is have our planning boards read this book and care about it. Right? And the thing is that I think the retrofit quick solution for the scenario you're outlining that I already undertake, which is run a landscaping business that works with those property owners that are inclined to want to have an edible landscape, that want a garden, that want vegetables, and often just want us to do things like plant the trees, install the raised beds, put in the fence, and then they have fun with it as a family, right? And I think it's more realistic because developers don't typically do the landscaping. They subcontract the landscaping, right? So it would be like, do we have a landscaping crew in the area who has capacity and interest to say, well, we're going to do native perennial pollinator landscaping, we're going to do rain gardens, and for some property owners, we'll do edibles and we'll do some vegetables, and you install that.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally see how they're two different things. However, developers could create, space on a building for some of these things. So they could actually install places, and I guess it could be like an extension of a porch or a patio where there's actually like a space that is kind of mandatory for these kind of things going forward. So
sounds great.
Yeah.
Let's get some architects on that. Michael.
You're muted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you tell me the author again of that book, Growing Greener?
You bet. It is Randall Arendt. And anybody who'd like to have a follow-up meeting with me about some of this stuff, I'd love to talk shop further. I'm obviously dropping a lot of examples and information, and I really would enjoy any follow-up conversations that folks want to have about getting a little deeper. I barely got into the work that we're doing with the Permaculture Living Lands Trust. One of the cool projects we did is planting on the Esopus with Ulster County Soil and Water, where we DEC Trees for Tribs donated the trees, but we hand selected what the species were, and we pushed it towards wild edibles. So we did a lot of persimmon, we did a lot of hazelnut, we did juneberry, we did high bush blueberry, right? And then we also pushed succession later than they typically do. So we did a lot of oaks, we did a lot of sycamores. And then we also planted it with hicans, with heart nuts, and with butternuts. So I'm excited about that project because we finally got one that's a real example that we can show you that's right there at the turnaround the roundabout as you get on 87 coming into Kingston off of 28. It's right there on the Esopus.
And one other thing, I really enjoyed the presentation. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
But it went by very fast, and I would like to, if possible, get a copy of the slide presentation so I can sort of absorb it. Is that possible?
Sure. It's a pretty big file. I could probably figure out how to put it on like a Google Doc or something and just send you a link to it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll figure that out.
All right. Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Penny, do you have another question?
Yeah, I did.
Right.
I've been being shamed by friends and neighbors and family members who think that burning wood is a mistake.
Yeah.
And
that's why I'm coming out strong on that one.
I heard you coming out strong, and I was feeling really good about it. But I mean, I have a stove with it's a Yodel stove. It has a converter and
burn. Yep.
And I burn hot, dry wood. Am I being destructive? Is that a mistake?
No, many people will say there's solid science behind calling wood carbon neutral. And the logic in that is to say the amount of carbon you're returning into the atmosphere is the amount of carbon that wood stored. What is creating carbon excess is fossil fuels, because they are stored reserves of carbon that weren't part of the present atmosphere at all, that then we're mining, extracting, and burning and creating this exorbitantly excessive payload of carbon.
So I've heard that I'm sorry, I thought you were through.
No, I was saying
I've heard that when trees fall in the forest, that they release as much carbon dioxide as they do when they're burned, or more.
A slower release, I would think. Yeah, but
it's comparable.
Sure. Anything that decays is going to release its carbon. It's going to transpire it.
Oh, I feel much better. Thank you.
Yeah. And I just think there's no argument against it when you're living in a landscape where the grid is so fragile as ours is, and you end up, what are you held hostage to having to get a giant generator? And how environmental is that at the end of the day? These generators are often run off of propane. So if you get into these net zero 100% electric houses, you're entirely dependent on the grid in the wintertime for your heat. And the reliability of a wood stove when the grid is out, that's when you realize how invaluable they are as a backup heat supply, even if they're not your primary, because all of a sudden you can be cooking your dinner on it, you could be making tea on it, you can be boiling hot water for dishes, plus you're heating your home. You know, I just, as somebody who grew up with wood stoves and who homesteaded for 8 years, life without a wood stove in a cold climate like this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it's a good solution for New York City. I don't think it's necessarily a be all end all for every scenario. But what I am suggesting is when we're in more rural and suburban areas in the northeastern deciduous forest landscape, it is definitely part of our repertoire that we want to consider. And there are going to be situations where electric is going to be the best choice when we have, say, people who aren't mobility capable to the point that wood heat requires, when we have people who might not know how to operate a wood stove safely, right? So there's a whole set of selective measures that I'm not trying to make some rash generalization about it being ideal.
It's an upper body strength challenge.
Right. There's a lot to it. But when it comes down to the real, if you're fortunate enough to feel in a position to have wood heat, I think it's just such a great, reliable form of comfort in a place where we get a pretty serious winter. You know, there's nothing that feels more secure than having a wood stove and knowing how to operate it. But that's just my own personal experience and attachment. I think we're going to find a lot of opportunities where electric heat makes sense. Right technology for the right job is what I'm an advocate of.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that we stay agile, we stay nimble enough, flexible enough to not get like rigid and single function, like I was saying, this idea where we just get into these, we're just going to do everything with photovoltaic and with wind and with mega hydro, ends up being a very problematic repetition of patterns of design that have shown themselves to not be reliable and to not be, in many cases, ethically responsible, because these mega systems get into displacing people, very often displacing people who don't have as much political power. And that's important to recognize, that it perpetuates potentially a scenario that has some ethical problems with it that we need to look at seriously about what kind of energy system do we want to replace the present energy system with? What type of food system do we want to replace the present food system with? And I appreciate folks taking the time. As we wrap up, I'll say that one of the things that I would encourage you to explore from tonight and from ideas I've put out there is that, first of all, I have a class starting online on Saturday that I definitely strongly encourage you, if you want to do a deeper dive into this, check that out on my website, permaculturenewyork.com. And that's a permaculture design certification that's online every Saturday and Sunday, starting September 23rd and ending November 4th, with a bunch of guest teachers that are from all around the world. And that I would leave you with, I really think that it's important that we get our food right and have a food plan, because it's also a way we can have watershed protection combined with initiatives that give us something that if the lights don't come on and we don't have power, we are still fed. We're going to find that that is much more of a foundational need than electricity and energy is. Food is fundamentally much more important than electricity and energy are. And if we just sit with that for a moment, you'll find that that is absolutely unequivocally true. And when we know that in our own intuition, in our own hearts and minds, as we think about it and say, yeah, food is definitely something I need more than whether I have lights on or I have electricity, then you'll understand why I'm saying that creates a critical ranking where we say, let's get the food situation right. We need a food master plan for food security. Folks have other questions, comments, thoughts, things you want to talk about?
Well done.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Making sense?
Inspiring.
Oh,
and
good.
I just,
Thank
I want to know how to get there.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of free videos and I put a lot into film because I think film is a great medium to communicate. So please, if you go to my website, we put a lot of work into a videos page. That video page is organized by themes, by topics, and it'll give you, we have urban section, home gardening section, water systems, all free, just stuff you can watch. And stay in touch, please. My contact is there on the website.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you.
Really.